Jason Statham opened his eyes slowly as the first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains of his bedroom window. The famous action star stretched his arms above his head and took a deep breath. After months of intense filming for his latest movie, he finally had a weekend to himself. No early morning calls from directors. No stunt coordinators asking him to jump off buildings or fight 10 men at once. Just peace and quiet in his beautiful Los Angeles home. He rolled out of bed and walked barefoot across the cool hardwood floor to his kitchen. The house was silent except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of birds chirping outside. Jason loved these quiet moments. Most people knew him as the tough guy from action movies, but few knew how much he valued simple, peaceful mornings like this one. He made himself a cup of strong black coffee, just the way he liked it. Steam rose from the mug as he held it between his large hands. The smell filled his nostrils and instantly made him feel more awake. Jason walked out to his private terrace that overlooked the neighborhood below. The morning air was fresh and clean. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the palm trees in his backyard. From his terrace, Jason could see other houses spread out across the hills. Some had swimming pools that sparkled like blue diamonds in the morning light. Others had beautiful gardens with colorful flowers that seemed to dance in the breeze. This was one of those expensive neighborhoods where celebrities and wealthy families lived quiet lives away from the chaos of downtown Los Angeles. As Jason sipped his coffee, he thought about his plans for the day. He had no meetings, no phone calls to return, and no scripts to read. For the first time in months, his schedule was completely empty. The idea made him smile. He decided he would spend the morning jogging through the neighborhood like he used to do before his career got so busy. Jogging had always been Jason's favorite way to exercise and think. When he was growing up in England, he would run for miles through the streets near his home. It helped him stay in shape and cleared his mind of any worries or stress. Even after becoming famous, he tried to maintain this simple routine whenever possible. He finished his coffee and went back inside to change clothes. Jason put on his favorite pair of running shorts and a simple gray t-shirt. He laced up his well-worn running shoes that had carried him through countless miles over the years. These shoes had been with him on movie sets around the world, from London to Hong Kong to New York City. Before leaving the house, Jason checked himself in the hallway mirror. His reflection showed a man in excellent physical condition despite being in his 50s. Years of martial arts training and movie stunts had kept his body strong and lean. His bald head gleamed under the hallway light, and his eyes held the same intensity that made him perfect for action roles. Jason stepped outside and locked his front door behind him. The neighborhood was already coming to life around him. He could see an elderly man watering his garden across the street. A woman was walking her small white dog along the sidewalk. Two teenagers rode past on their bicycles, laughing about something only they understood. This was exactly what Jason needed after months of controlled chaos on movie sets. Real life happening around him at a natural pace. No cameras recording his every move. No directors shouting instructions. Just him and the peaceful morning ahead. He began walking down his driveway toward the street. His muscles felt loose and ready for exercise. The sun was getting warmer on his face, and the air smelled like jasmine flowers from the gardens around him. Jason had no idea that in just 20 minutes his peaceful morning would become something completely different. Something that would test every part of his character and change the life of an innocent creature forever. As he reached the sidewalk and began his gentle warm-up jog, Jason felt grateful for simple moments like these. Little did he know that sometimes the most important battles happen when you least expect them. Jason settled into a comfortable jogging pace as he moved through the quiet streets of his neighborhood. His breathing was steady, and his footsteps created a rhythmic sound against the pavement. The morning sun felt warm on his shoulders, and he could feel his muscles loosening up with each stride. This was exactly what he needed after so many weeks of being cooped up on movie sets. He jogged past familiar houses that he had seen dozens of times before. There was the blue house with the rose garden where an old couple lived, the modern white house where a young family had just moved in last month, The Spanish-style house with the red tile roof where someone was always working on vintage cars in the garage. Each house held its own story, and Jason enjoyed being part of this peaceful community. About 15 minutes into his jog, Jason turned onto Maple Street, which led toward the small neighborhood park. This was usually his favorite part of the route because the street was lined with beautiful oak trees that created natural shade. Children often played in their front yards here, and neighbors would wave to him as he passed by. But today something felt different. As Jason approached the area near the park, he began to hear sounds that seemed out of place for such a quiet Sunday morning. At first the noises were faint, and he thought maybe someone was doing yard work or fixing something in their garage. But as he got closer, the sounds became clearer and much more disturbing. The first thing he noticed was the loud rumbling of motorcycle engines. Not just one or two bikes, but several of them revving aggressively. The engines would roar loudly, then quiet down, then roar again in an irregular pattern. Jason frowned because this kind of noise seemed inappropriate for a residential area, especially on a Sunday morning when families were trying to enjoy their weekend. But then he heard something else mixed in with the motorcycle sounds. Something that made his blood run cold and his jogging pace slow to a worried walk. It was the sound of an animal in distress, high-pitched whimpering and yelping that spoke of fear and possibly pain. The desperate cries cut through the morning air like a knife. Jason stopped jogging completely and stood still on the sidewalk, listening carefully. His years of training for action movies had taught him to pay attention to his surroundings and trust his instincts when something felt wrong. Right now, every instinct he had was telling him that whatever was happening behind those houses was not normal or innocent. The animal sounds continued and seemed to be getting more desperate. Mixed with the yelping, he could now hear human voices shouting and laughing. The combination of scared animal cries and human laughter made Jason feel sick to his stomach. He had grown up around tough people and had seen cruelty before, but something about this situation triggered a deep anger inside him. Jason began moving toward the source of the sounds, staying close to parked cars and trees to avoid being seen. His movie training had taught him how to move quietly and observe situations before acting. As he got closer, he could hear the voices more clearly. They were rough male voices using crude language and seeming to enjoy whatever they were doing. The motorcycle engines continued their aggressive revving, creating a soundtrack of mechanical violence that mixed horribly with the animals' cries for help. Jason could feel his heart rate increasing, not from the jogging, but from a growing sense of urgency and anger. He crept closer, using his knowledge of the neighborhood to find the best path toward the sounds. Whatever was happening, he knew he needed to see it with his own eyes before deciding what to do. The peaceful morning he had been enjoying just minutes before now felt like a distant memory, as something dark and cruel revealed itself in his quiet neighborhood. Jason crept around the corner of a tall wooden fence and finally saw what was making all the terrible noise. What he witnessed made his entire body tense with rage and disbelief. In a small empty lot behind a row of houses, 5 men on motorcycles had surrounded a small golden retriever puppy. The little dog looked terrified and exhausted as it cowered in the center of their cruel circle. The bikers were taking turns revving their engines loudly right next to the frightened animal. Each time a motorcycle roared to life, the puppy would jump and try to run away, but there was nowhere to go. The men were laughing and shouting at each other, like this was some kind of sick game they were enjoying. Their leather jackets had patches and symbols that marked them as members of an organized motorcycle gang. Jason watched in horror as one of the bikers grabbed a thick rope that was already tied around the puppy's neck. Every time the little dog tried to escape toward the edge of the lot, the man would yank hard on the rope, pulling the animal back into the center of their circle. The puppy would stumble and fall, then struggle back to its feet, only to be terrorized by another roaring engine. The leader of the group was a large man with a thick black beard and arms covered in tattoos. He seemed to be enjoying the cruelty more than the others. He would rev his engine the loudest and laugh the hardest when the puppy showed signs of fear. His motorcycle was bigger and louder than the rest, making the most frightening noise when he twisted the throttle. Jason could see that the puppy was not just scared but also physically suffering. Its golden fur was dirty and matted with dust from being dragged around the lot. The little dog was panting heavily from exhaustion and stress. Its eyes were wide with terror, and it kept looking around desperately for any way to escape the nightmare it was trapped in. Two of the younger bikers seemed to be getting more aggressive as the game continued. One of them rode his motorcycle in tight circles around the puppy, making the engine scream at high RPMs. The other was using a stick to poke at the animal whenever it tried to lie down and rest. They were feeding off each other's cruelty, and the situation was getting worse by the minute. Jason realized this was not something that had just started. The puppy looked like it had been suffering for a long time. Its body language showed complete defeat and exhaustion. This was systematic torture of an innocent animal by men who found pleasure in causing pain to something that could not fight back. The worst part was how much they were enjoying it. These were not people who were accidentally being cruel or who did not understand what they were doing. They knew exactly how much fear and pain they were causing, and that knowledge made them laugh louder and rev their engines harder. Jason felt his hands clenching into fists as he watched another round of their sick game. The bearded leader revved his engine so loudly that the puppy collapsed to the ground in terror. Instead of showing any mercy, the man laughed and called out to his friends to do the same thing. The scene was so disturbing that Jason had to force himself to keep watching and planning instead of rushing in immediately. His training had taught him to assess dangerous situations carefully, but every second he waited meant more suffering for the innocent animal trapped in the center of that circle of cruelty. Jason knew he was looking at something that would haunt him forever if he did not act. The question was no longer whether he should get involved. The only question was how he could stop this horror as quickly as possible. Jason stood frozen behind the fence, watching the horrible scene unfold in front of him. His mind was racing as he tried to figure out the best way to handle this dangerous situation. There were 5 grown men with motorcycles, and he was alone on foot. Any smart person would call the police and wait for help to arrive. But as he watched the little puppy collapse again from exhaustion, Jason felt his rational thinking being overwhelmed by pure emotion. The action star had faced many dangerous situations in his movies, but this was completely different. In films, everything was planned and controlled with stunt coordinators and safety experts making sure nobody got hurt. Here in this empty lot, there were no safety nets or second takes. These were real criminals doing real harm to an innocent animal, and Jason was the only person who could stop it. He pulled out his phone and almost dialed 911, but then stopped. How long would it take for police to arrive on a Sunday morning? 10 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe longer if they were busy with other calls. Jason looked at the exhausted puppy and realized it might not survive that long. The little dog was already showing signs of serious distress, and the bikers were getting more aggressive with each passing minute. Jason thought about his own pets at home. He had 2 dogs that he loved like family members. The idea of anyone hurting them the way these men were hurting this puppy made his blood boil with anger. He imagined how helpless and terrified his own dogs would feel in this situation and knew he could not walk away. But there were serious risks to consider. These men were clearly part of an organized gang based on their matching leather jackets and the way they worked together. Getting into a fight with them could result in serious injury or worse. Jason was in excellent physical condition and had years of martial arts training, but 5 against 1 were not good odds, especially when the 5 had weapons and motorcycles. There was also his career to think about. Jason had worked hard to build his reputation as a professional actor. Getting arrested for fighting with bikers would make headlines around the world. Movie studios might decide he was too much trouble to hire. His agent would probably have a heart attack when he heard about it. Jason watched as the bearded leader grabbed the rope around the puppy's neck and dragged it across the rough ground. The little dog yelped in pain and tried to get back on its feet, but was too weak to stand properly. That image burned itself into Jason's mind, and suddenly all his concerns about career and safety seemed unimportant. He had spent years pretending to be a hero in movies, playing characters who stood up for the innocent and fought against bullies and criminals. Now he had a chance to be that hero in real life. Not for cameras or money or fame, but because it was the right thing to do. Because an innocent creature was suffering, and he was the only one who could help. Jason felt his jaw muscles tighten as he made his decision. He had always believed that action spoke louder than words. That what a person did when nobody was watching revealed their true character. Well, somebody was watching now. The puppy was watching with desperate eyes, hoping for rescue. And Jason knew he would never be able to live with himself if he walked away. He took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the fence, ready to face whatever consequences came next. Jason stepped out from behind the fence and walked calmly toward the group of bikers. His movement was steady and controlled, like a predator approaching its prey. The morning sun was behind him, casting his shadow long across the dusty ground. Every step he took was measured and purposeful, showing no fear despite being outnumbered 5-1. The first biker to notice him was a younger man with spiky hair who had been poking the puppy with a stick. He stopped what he was doing and stared at Jason with his mouth hanging open. Then he elbowed the man next to him and pointed. Within seconds, all 5 bikers had turned to look at the famous action star walking toward them. Jason could see recognition spreading across their faces. Even these rough criminals knew who he was from his movies, but instead of being impressed or intimidated, they seemed to find his presence amusing. The bearded leader threw back his head and laughed loudly enough to be heard over the rumbling of the motorcycle engines. When Jason got close enough to be heard clearly, he stopped walking and spoke in his distinctive British accent. His voice was calm and steady, but carried an unmistakable tone of authority. "Gentlemen," he said, looking each of them in the eye, "I think you have had enough fun for one day. Let the dog go, and we can all walk away from this peacefully." The bikers looked at each other, and several of them started laughing. They clearly thought this was some kind of joke, a Hollywood actor trying to play tough guy in real life. The leader revved his engine loudly and shouted over the noise, "Hey, look everybody, it's the movie star. You think because you fight fake battles on screen you can handle the real thing." Jason did not respond to the insult. Instead, he took another step closer to the group. His eyes never left the bearded leader, but he was also watching the positions of the other 4 men. Years of fight choreography had taught him to be aware of multiple opponents at the same time. He could see that 2 of the younger bikers looked less confident than the others and might not be fully committed to a fight. The leader shut off his engine and climbed off his motorcycle. He was even bigger than Jason had thought from a distance, probably 6'4" and weighing at least 250 pounds. His arms were thick with muscle and covered in tattoos that told stories of violence and time spent in prison. This was clearly a man who had been in many fights and was not easily intimidated. "What makes you think you can tell us what to do?" the leader asked as he walked closer to Jason. "This is none of your business, movie boy. We found this little pest running around loose and decided to have some fun with it. Nothing wrong with that." Jason felt his anger rising, but kept his voice level and controlled. "I am making it my business," he replied. "That animal is suffering, and you know it. Release it now, and nobody has to get hurt." The other bikers were spreading out around Jason, trying to surround him. Their engines were still running, creating a wall of noise that would make it hard for anyone nearby to hear what was happening. Jason realized they had probably done this before, found isolated spots where they could do whatever they wanted without interference. The bearded leader smiled, showing teeth that were yellow and crooked. "You really think you are some kind of hero, do not you?" he said. "Well, let me tell you something, action man. This is not one of your movies. There are no stunt doubles here. No soft landing pads. Just 5 real men who do not like being told what to do by some pretty boy actor." Jason glanced down at the puppy, which was lying on its side, breathing heavily. The little dog looked up at him with eyes that seemed to understand he was there to help. That look gave Jason all the motivation he needed. He turned back to the leader and spoke with quiet determination. "Last chance," he said. "Let the dog go." The bearded leader clearly did not like being given ultimatums, especially by someone he saw as just a pampered Hollywood actor. His face turned red with anger, and he stepped even closer to Jason until they were almost nose to nose. "You really want to do this," he growled. "You want to throw away your pretty movie career over some worthless mutt?" Jason did not back down or show any sign of fear despite being face to face with a man who was clearly dangerous and unpredictable. He had learned long ago that bullies respected strength and despised weakness. If he showed even a moment of doubt or hesitation, these men would tear him apart. The other four bikers had positioned themselves in a loose circle around Jason with their motorcycles still running. The engines created a constant rumbling noise that made normal conversation impossible. They had to shout to be heard over the mechanical roar. Jason realized this was probably intentional. The noise would mask any sounds of a fight and make it harder for neighbors to know what was happening. One of the younger bikers, a thin man with multiple face piercings, suddenly grabbed the rope that was still tied around the puppy's neck. He yanked it hard, making the exhausted animal cry out in pain and terror. "Look at that!" the pierced man shouted with a cruel laugh. "I think the little pest wants to play some more." That action was the final straw for Jason. All his restraint and careful planning disappeared in an instant. He had tried to resolve this peacefully, but these men were determined to continue their cruelty. The sight of the puppy being deliberately hurt again triggered every protective instinct he had. Jason moved with the speed and precision that had made him famous in action movies, but this time there were no special effects or camera tricks. This was real combat training put into practice. In one fluid motion, he stepped toward the man holding the rope and delivered a powerful strike to his wrist. The blow was perfectly placed to hit the nerve cluster that would cause instant pain and muscle weakness. The pierced biker immediately dropped the rope and stumbled backward, clutching his wrist and screaming in pain. He had not expected the movie star to actually know how to fight. Like most people, he assumed that Hollywood action was all fake and that actors were just pretty faces who could not handle real violence. The sudden explosion of real action caught the other bikers off guard. They had been expecting threats and tough talk, not actual combat. For a moment, they just stood there staring as their friend writhed in pain on the ground. That moment of surprise was exactly what Jason needed. He quickly moved toward the puppy, which was now free from the rope, but too scared and weak to run away. Jason positioned himself between the small animal and the remaining four bikers. His stance was that of a trained fighter, balanced and ready to move in any direction. His years of martial arts practice had taught him how to face multiple opponents. The bearded leader was furious that his authority had been challenged so directly. "Nobody hits one of my guys and walks away," he roared. His voice was filled with rage and the promise of violence. He signaled to the other three men, and they began closing in on Jason from different angles. But something unexpected happened that changed the entire situation. Two of the younger bikers stopped moving toward Jason and looked uncertain. One of them actually took a step backward. Jason could see doubt in their eyes as they realized this was escalating beyond what they had signed up for. The biker who stepped back was a kid who could not have been more than 20 years old. He looked at the whimpering puppy, then at Jason, then at his angry leader. "Wait a minute, Rick," he called out to the bearded man. "This has gone too far. We were just supposed to be messing around, not actually fighting some celebrity over a dog." His words created a crack in the group's unity that Jason immediately recognized and decided to exploit. Jason watched as the group of bikers began to split apart right in front of his eyes. What had started as 5 men united in cruelty was quickly becoming a much more complicated situation. The young biker who had spoken up against the leader was now standing several feet away from the others, looking uncomfortable and conflicted. The second young biker, a man with long brown hair and nervous eyes, also stepped back from the confrontation. He kept glancing between Jason and the injured puppy with an expression that showed he was having serious second thoughts about what they had been doing. "Yeah, Rick, maybe we should just get out of here," he said to the bearded leader. "This is getting way too crazy." Jason realized he was witnessing something he had not expected. These were not all hardened criminals who enjoyed causing pain. Some of them were just young men who had gotten caught up in group pressure and mob mentality. Now that they were faced with real consequences and actual violence, they were remembering their consciences. The bearded leader named Rick was absolutely furious at what he saw as betrayal by his own crew. His face turned an even deeper shade of red, and the veins in his neck stood out like thick ropes. "You cowards," he screamed at the two younger men. "You are going to let some pretty boy actor make fools of us. We came here to have fun, and nobody is going to stop us." But his angry words only made the situation worse for him. The young biker with the nervous eyes actually moved closer to Jason, as if seeking protection from his own leader's rage. "I did not sign up to fight movie stars over some dog," he said. "This is insane, Rick. Let's just leave before somebody calls the cops." Jason saw his opportunity and decided to take advantage of the division in their ranks. He spoke directly to the two young men who seemed to have developed consciences. "You do not have to be part of this," he said in a calm but firm voice. "Help me get this dog to safety, and nobody needs to get hurt. You can walk away from this and never look back." The long-haired biker looked down at the puppy, which was still lying on the ground panting heavily. The little dog's golden fur was matted with dirt, and its eyes showed the kind of trauma that comes from prolonged abuse. Something in that innocent face seemed to reach through to whatever humanity was left in the young man. "I am done with this," he said suddenly. He turned off his motorcycle engine and dismounted. "Rick, you have lost your mind. I joined this club to ride bikes and have fun, not to torture animals like some kind of psychopath. Count me out." His decision seemed to give courage to the other young biker, who also shut off his engine. "This is not what we used to be about," he said sadly. "My little sister has a dog that looks just like this one. I cannot be part of this anymore." Now, instead of facing 5 opponents, Jason was looking at just 3. The bearded leader Rick, and one other older biker who seemed determined to stick with their leader no matter what. But even that remaining loyal biker looked uncertain as he watched his crew falling apart around him. Rick was practically foaming at the mouth with rage. "You traitors," he screamed. "You weak, pathetic traitors. I will remember this. All of you will pay for this humiliation." But his threats only pushed the two young men further toward Jason's side. The long-haired biker actually walked over and knelt down next to the injured puppy. "Hey, little guy," he said softly. "We are going to get you some help. I am so sorry about what we did to you." Jason felt a moment of hope as he realized the situation had changed dramatically in his favor. Instead of being outnumbered 5-1, he now had allies. 2 of the former enemies had switched sides and were ready to help rescue the puppy. The odds had suddenly become much more manageable. But Rick was not finished yet. His rage was making him even more dangerous and unpredictable than before. Rick looked around at the scene that had completely fallen apart around him. 2 of his crew members were now helping the enemy. One was still clutching his injured wrist and moaning in pain. Only one loyal follower remained by his side, and even that man looked like he was having second thoughts about continuing this fight. The bearded leader realized that attacking Jason Statham with witnesses present would be incredibly stupid. Fighting a famous actor would bring police attention that no motorcycle gang wanted, especially when some of his own crew members would probably testify against him. His anger was still burning hot, but his survival instincts were finally starting to override his rage. "This is not over, movie star," Rick snarled as he backed toward his motorcycle. "You think you won something here, but you just made enemies of the wrong people. We know where you live. We know what cars you drive. This is far from finished." Jason stood his ground, showing no fear of the threats. "If you or any of your friends come near me or this dog again, you will discover that I am much better at real fighting than movie fighting," he replied calmly. "And next time, I will not be so gentle." The injured biker with the pierced face was still holding his wrist and whimpering. Rick grabbed him roughly and shoved him toward one of the motorcycles. "Get up, you worthless piece of garbage," he shouted. "We are leaving before this gets any worse." The loyal follower who had stayed with Rick throughout the confrontation finally spoke up. "Maybe we should just call it even, boss," he suggested nervously. "Nobody got seriously hurt, and the cops are probably already on their way. Let's just get out of here while we still can." Rick glared at his remaining crew member with pure hatred, but realized the man was probably right. The smart thing to do was leave immediately before law enforcement arrived. He climbed onto his motorcycle and started the engine with an angry roar. The injured biker climbed weakly onto the back of the bike, still favoring his hurt wrist. "You made a big mistake today," Rick shouted over the engine noise as he prepared to leave. "A mistake you are going to regret for the rest of your life." Then he gunned the engine and roared away from the lot with his injured companion holding on behind him. The third loyal biker looked at Jason, then at his departing leader, then back at Jason again. He seemed torn between loyalty to this gang and the obvious fact that they had been doing something terrible. Finally, he shook his head sadly and started his own motorcycle. "I am sorry about the dog," he called out to Jason as he prepared to follow Rick. "Some of us are not as bad as we seem." Then he too roared away, leaving Jason alone with the two young men who had switched sides. The sudden quiet after all the motorcycle engines shut off felt almost magical. Birds were singing again in the nearby trees. The morning sun felt warm and peaceful instead of harsh and threatening. The nightmare was finally over, and the puppy was safe. Jason immediately knelt down next to the exhausted little dog. The animal was breathing heavily and seemed barely conscious from stress and dehydration. "Hey there, little one," he said in the gentlest voice he could manage. "You are safe now. Nobody is going to hurt you anymore." The two former bikers also knelt down beside the puppy. Both men had tears in their eyes as they looked at what their group had done to this innocent creature. "We need to get him to a veterinarian right away," said the long-haired one. "There is a pet hospital about 10 minutes from here." Jason carefully lifted the puppy in his arms. The little dog was lighter than it should have been, showing signs of not eating properly for several days. But it looked up at Jason with grateful eyes that seemed to understand it had been rescued. "Everything is going to be okay now," Jason whispered as he carried the puppy toward his car. 3 months later, Jason was sitting in his backyard, enjoying another peaceful Sunday morning. But this time he was not alone. A healthy golden retriever was lying next to his chair, soaking up the warm California sunshine. The dog that Jason had named Hero was now a completely different animal from the terrified puppy he had rescued that day. Hero's golden fur was now clean and shiny. His eyes were bright and alert instead of filled with fear. He had gained the proper weight for a young dog his age and showed no signs of the trauma he had endured. Most importantly, he seemed completely happy and secure in his new home with Jason. The veterinarian had told Jason that Hero would make a full recovery, but it would take time for the emotional wounds to heal. Dogs who had been abused often remained fearful and suspicious for months or even years afterward. But Hero had surprised everyone with how quickly he had bounced back from his ordeal. Maybe it was because he somehow understood that Jason had saved him. From the very first day at the veterinary clinic, Hero had shown a special bond with his rescuer. He would follow Jason everywhere and seemed most comfortable when he was close to the action star who had become his protector and friend. The two young bikers who had helped with the rescue had also surprised Jason. Their names were Tommy and Jake, and they had completely changed their lives after that day. Both men had quit the motorcycle gang and found legitimate jobs. Tommy was now working at an animal shelter helping other abused animals find new homes. Jake had enrolled in community college to study veterinary science. They visited Jason and Hero regularly, bringing updates on their new lives and always spending time playing with the dog they had helped save. The three men had formed an unlikely friendship based on their shared experience and their commitment to making sure nothing like that ever happened again. The police had eventually caught up with Rick and his remaining gang members. The two young men who had switched sides provided testimony about the animal abuse they had witnessed. Combined with Jason's statement and the evidence from the veterinary examination, the authorities had enough to press serious charges. Rick was sentenced to 6 months in jail and 2 years of probation. He was also banned from owning any animals for 10 years. The other gang members received lighter sentences, but all of them had to perform community service at local animal shelters. Jason hoped that working with animals might teach them the empathy they had been lacking. But the best part of the whole story was watching Hero discover what it meant to be loved and cared for properly. The first time the puppy had played with a toy, Jason had nearly cried with happiness. The first time Hero had barked playfully instead of in fear had been a moment of pure joy. And the first time the dog had fallen asleep peacefully in Jason's lap had convinced the action star that he had made the right decision that morning. Jason often thought about how different things might have been if he had just called the police and waited. Hero might not have survived long enough for help to arrive. Or even if he had survived the physical abuse, the emotional damage might have been too severe to overcome. Now, as Jason watched Hero chase butterflies around the garden, he knew that sometimes the most important action scenes happened off camera in real life. He had spent years pretending to be a hero in movies, but saving Hero had made him feel like a real hero for the first time. The morning sun felt warm on both their faces as Jason and Hero enjoyed their peaceful Sunday together. Two unlikely friends who had found each other through tragedy and had created something beautiful from what had started as something terrible.